Good morning, everybody. It's not morning right here. It's afternoon. And I am just lying to you. I'm a filthy liar, honestly. Today, we are having one of the more, I wouldn't say final, but one of the more all-encompassing videos about 10th edition, I'd say. The video title, and I'm going to be repeating a whole lot during this, is Beach View in an Ugly House, which is the general way I like to describe 10th edition right now. Before we start, I got new merch, by the way. If you want to check that out, orchid8.com, link in the description. He's my boy, so I gotta get the Forge King as a shirt. It's also available on a tank top if you want to sport him on a tank top, because it's like a cool ass like death metal looking ass thing. It's really fun. Anyway, it's not in the description if you want to check it out. I'm really happy with how it turned out. So besides the new merch thing, so beach view in an empty house, or in an ugly house. 10th edition is just now finally out. It came out on the prior Saturday. This video is going up Monday. I think Monday. So it's been out for a couple of days. And depending on who you ask, the overarching feelings on 10th edition are quite widespread. Depending on who you ask, some people love it, some people hate it, some people are confused by it, some people it's wildly different in terms of the games you got to play. And I think a lot of this can be chalked up to a few major issues, but also mainly for the most part, what kind of player you are. I think the more casual and semi-competitive people are finding a hell of a lot more fun in this game than the competitive people. I think that this overall idea of 10th edition is generally well formulated for the majority of games, but a just complete nightmare at the highest level. And that's the whole point, is the beach view in the ugly house. I think that for 10th edition, for the times that I've played, for the games that I've played, I find the foundation of the game, the beach view, to be incredibly good. If people, that's why is this 2,000 square foot house $5 million? Because location. But like, for example, the good stuff, right? The good stuff of 10th, there is a really solid foundation made for this system. Because, unlike 8th to 9th, which was just kind of like 8.5, 10th is a radical difference in the overall game. And there's a lot about it that I think is really good, excellent even, and blows 9th out of the water with its systems. The data card system, I think, is fantastic. I think the entire point of the data cards, having it all viewable on a single card that can, of course, either be purchased or printed out yourself, is just an excellent way to go about it. It's quick, it's simple, it's right there. You can just flip through them incredibly easily to find your thing you need. The army rules and detachment rules thing, I think, is also very good. While I guess it is simplified in terms of the overarching flavor, I think a lot of the flavor is now being put into the various data cards themselves when it comes to each individual unit. So the flavor is more unit dependent, not army dependent, but even so, being able to just say, hey, this is your army rule. And this is the attachment you're taking, which gives you this sub-faction rule, and here are your enhancements and stratagems. It is a breath of fresh air when it comes to bookkeeping, logging, and memorization. It is basically in a single page. If you had one single page, you can give your opponent exactly what your army does, the sub-faction, and all the strats and enhancements you took, and you just hand it to them. And it is easy as pie to remember everything. You don't need to remember 19 stratagems, 6 warlord traits, 6 relics, and all kinds of stuff like that. It's just there. And I think that is so handy for speeding up the game and stopping your opponent from having too much, like, you won because they didn't understand moments, OC. Objective control, I think, is an incredible change and should never go away. I think objective control is just a great way to make big things feel more important for objectives, make small things feel less important, and also stop you from having that prior issue where you could spam 300 conscripts and just outmass the enemy, because you can't outmass the enemy's OC, for example. And you also lose it with Battle Shock. Speaking of, I like Battle Shock. I think Battle Shock is a fun method as well. It's not quite as good as I thought it could be. It's a little bit unreliable for the most part, but I do like the idea of Battle Shock and how it is implemented. It could use maybe a couple adjustments for the most part, but I do like it as a concept. But yeah, I like OC a lot. I think just objective control as a metric is a much better way to handle how objectives are taken than by models. Because if it's just by models, you have a spam problem. And if you do it in any too far the other direction, then, you know, smaller units have less of a reason to exist. You know, it's a good way to make troops still have their troops reason, their battle line reason too. Leaders, I think, are really good. I like the idea of sticking characters into various units and having them buff the unit. I think it allows for a lot less of a, how would you say, like a castle build. It stops castles for the most part. I mean, you might have some units that still castle, like the lion or Gilliman or something, you know, a big old aura. But besides those giant centerpiece models, which it kind of is in the name, right? The centerpiece. So that kind of makes it a bit more acceptable. But besides them, it does allow for fewer castles, fewer just giant death balls of units, and allowing you to be more flexible and move them out. Universal special rules is a godsend, an absolute godsend. That is nice that everyone can have that. That goes along with weapon profiles too. Weapon profiles now giving so much more customization. Not every weapon has to be a something. It can be blank with the somethings added on. 1 million keywords or none. It gives a vastly larger amount of customization to it. The wider toughness range, I think, is very handy as well because it allows for a more diverse level of toughnesses to adjust for how tanky things are. And also the mission. Yeah, the missions too. The last thing I have written down here are the missions. The mission pack is so much fun. It's so much fun. I mean, I guess there is a certain aspect of randomness and all with the tactical missions, but you can always take fixed if you don't want to deal with the randomness. I love the various kinds of mission rules, like the landmines or the Vox static. I like how the missions play. They're really fun. They're different. And then I like how the scoring is set up. You guys both fight over primary, and then you have your supplementary secondaries to go along with it. 10th edition data cards or army cards for like the mission and stuff, mission cards, that's the word. I adore it. I adore it. It is so much fun to be picking missions like that and having the various primaries and setting up the board. It is incredibly enjoyable. I think it is a blast. And for the most part, one of the things that I want to talk about when, you know, the beach view side of it is that they have created, they as in Games Workshop, have created the ability to have a fluid balancing system with far fewer like absolute rules. So, for example, I often think that one of the best ways to work with balancing, and you're balancing something, is the slider tool, right? Just the slider in general. And what's nice about, or before you could have sliders for certain weapons and things. You know, a heavy bolter, let's say, is, you know, strength 5, AP 1, 2 damage. You know, they were able to make it better because they slid the damage to 2 from 1, like when they changed that way back in, was it early 9th or something, late 8th? I don't quite remember, but around that period of time. You know, you could always slide the toughness up or the AP up or the damage up, but you couldn't slide heavy. You know, it was heavy 3. You really couldn't slide that. You could slide the number of shots, but not really as much before. Now, they've created the ability to where it's just the heavy bolter profile. And so you can slide it and add and subtract as many keywords as you want. Sustained hits 1, devastating wounds, assault, anti-X. Like there's all of these universal special rules that can be added and given, which is the slider, right? It allows you to buff and nerf things without having to touch the profile itself, which is not like the strength AP part, which is great. I really enjoy how OC is also a slider. Something that needs better objective control for the most part. You could always tick it up 1 or tick it down 1 if it's too powerful. You know, back then it was just models. The only person that had anything wacky was custodians, but it felt kind of janky. Now it's all fluid. It's great. Toughness, same thing. You can slide that toughness scale back and forth. Lots of things like that. It gives reason for more balance. It gives more avenues of balance. It has opened up more ways to balance the game, which I think is fantastic. And for the most part, Everything so far I've mentioned before, I really enjoy, and I find it to be a great foundation to build 10th on, which is the beach view part. Which is also a good reason why most players that are in the casual to semi-casual group seem to like playing the game so much. I myself, from the games I played both in real life and on text-to-speech, TTS, have been for the most part very enjoyable. The army, like the mission pack, has been really good. I've been enjoying how that operates, how that feels, how the card system goes, and that changes up how I play a ton. And so, I'll build a list with a game plan, but even so, the mission pack might change that game plan up. And that makes me interested and curious in how it can work when fighting armies that are relatively balanced. That's a caveat. When fighting armies that are relatively balanced and don't have the most ridiculous things. There's a lot to love. However, the house is hideous. It is like an Andrew Tate looking house, right? Just like $1 million and no taste. $1 million, whatever. I don't know. You got even less taste than that, however much money it is. Just no taste. Like the most gaudy, atrocious crap ever. War gear costs being removed is, while sometimes fun to have mixed squads, is just a really bad idea for balance because none of the weapons are properly balanced against each other. The model requirements is a horrendous idea, going from like 5 to 10 or whatever the number is, especially because not every pack is sold that way. Plague Marines are sold in squads of 7. You buy them in squads of 7. Like, you will always have too many Plague Marines. It'll take 5. Yeah, 5. Yeah. 5 packs of Plague Marines. Wait, that doesn't even work though. Oh no, I guess you could, because if it'd be 5, it'd be 35, and then you could take 3 squads of 10 and then a squad of 5. Because it's battle line, you can go up to 6. Yeah, okay, I guess that works. You would need a lot in order to in order to properly get the right amount. It's very aggravating and just completely arbitrary. And I don't really know why they did with this the way that it is. Points in general. Eldar are so undercosted. Fire prisms, Wraith. Eldar in general is a whole problem. The Wraith Knight, the Fire Prisms, the Vipers, the War Walkers. Oh God, the Farseers too. I mean, maybe the Farseers aren't really a point thing, but what they can do. Oh my God, the Eldar. And that goes along with Space Marines too. And honestly, and then let's get into the artillery talk. Like Games Workshop, how many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man? Indirect ruins the game. It ruins it. And now some of the best armies in the game are the ones that spam indirect. Specifically, your stupid t-shirt Space Marines. The Desolation, whatever Marines, they go like squad of 30 of them is a commonplace thing in the competitive scene, and they just run circles because O's of the moment is good on anything, and you do not need to have line of sight for that. So whirlwinds, thunderfire cannons, guard. You want to have a really bad time? Fight car park guard, where they park 1 million artillery in the back and just level you with it, because they will, because artillery is way too good right now. Artillery is way too strong. And once again, it is too good. And once again, it ruins the game. Like always. Like it always does. And I don't know why this mistake is constantly made over and over again. I do not get it. If you make indirect good, people will buy. Well, there's the answer. If you make indirect good, people will buy all your indirect. And then you've sold all your indirect. I've figured it out. I've reached enlightenment. It's insanity. And then you take that indirect and you put it against AdMech, Death Guard, and Leagues of Votann. You watch as they cry tears and tears and tears because nothing they have is very good. And then next thing you know, you fight Knights, and the towering keyword is just horrendous. And it allows you to see anybody at any point in time. And you're fighting Knights, and Knights have a whole new toughness bracket, and they're incredibly tanky, and they shoot like crazy. And then you combine that with the anti-X plus devastating wounds combo, and oh my God, it's all kinds of crap. So yeah, the house is hideous. With the certain group, with the right group, the house is hideous. because that's kind of the whole problem though, is that the base fundamentals minus probably one main thing, which is the towering keyword, which just needs to go away, or it needs to be reverted back to 9th edition towering. However they did that. For the most part, the entire game feels so good from its fundamental area. Its location is excellent. And for most people, they're probably going to enjoy the game because most people play casually. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess it depends on who you ask, the ones who play casually are not the loudest voices. Because the people who are the most into a game, and this is true for all games, all video games, all media, the people who are the most into it often play it the most competitively. And therefore, the most people who are the most into it most competitively are the ones who will talk the most. And therefore, their opinions will be circulated more than just the average player. And so you might get a bit of a weird mentality where you and all your friends are loving 10th edition because you're all relatively casual players. And then you look online, like, I want to learn more about 10th. And then you go to forum something, competitive Warhammer subreddit. There we go with that. I mean, you're on Reddit, so you already got a problem, but you go there and then everyone is like, holy shit, the world is on fire. This game is ruined. I hate Games Workshop. They shot my dog and kicked my kid at a mall in Santa Ana. And they've actually destroyed the game. Everything's on fire. I hate my life. I've been tabled on turn 2 40 games in a row. Because I keep fighting Desolation Space Marines or Tower or Wraith Knights or Imperial Knights, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're like, oh my God, is the game really that terrible? No, it's not. It's not. But it's got a lot of problems, and almost all of those problems are at the higher up area. There is an enormous disconnect from like the bottom 80 to 85% and the top 15. But the thing that's the most important is the top 15 sell your game. Those top 15 top players are the ones who talk about tournaments, who make videos about tournaments, who go out, they play, they collect, they tell people about it. They have YouTube channels, they do all kinds of stuff. I am in that in between. As many of you know, I attend plenty of tournaments, but I tend not to take the most hardcore meta stuff. I like to try to win with my weird things, So I'm not a top player, but I'm not casual either. I'm in that weird limbo in between. But even with that, I can feel both sides. So I'm experiencing both at the same time. I love 10th edition from a gameplay point of view and a foundation point of view. But against the right armies and in certain situations, it is abysmal. It is horrid. However, like I said, it's not as bad as you probably think it is because you're mostly hearing competitive mindsets, which is just how the internet works. So there's a lot of things to take in. And then that's why I keep saying beach view with an ugly house, because luckily the house can be rebuilt. And that's the most important part. You have the location already. Your foundation is there. It's solid. You can always rebuild the house. You can always, or at least redecorate, give it a new coat of paint, if anything. You can always change that up. So you look at something like war gear costs and model requirements, right? You can just go back on that. It won't, I'm honest to God, I normally don't like to say that slang is easy or whatever when it's, balancing a game, because I'm not a game designer or dev, but you just go back. I know it sounds, it's probably simpler said than done, but you just go back. No more of this weird squad-based cost thing or something like that. No more of that. We go back to points per model. Now, if you want to have a minimum squads and stuff, fine. Okay, like if you need an in between, fine. But for the most part, I would prefer the points per model thing. Like if you want to keep sisters at 10 models only, I don't like it, but whatever. But if you're playing Death Guard with Plague Marines and the box comes with 7, you should be points per modeling them from 5 to 10 because it's ridiculous. The war gear cost thing also should come in. I do not understand why Games Workshop has such an adverse feeling to non-multiples of 5 for their points. I do not understand it. It does not take that long to build a list. It might seem a little frightening for some new players, but it's really not. And that's not the thing that should be selling the game. New players are generally the ones who are building and painting anyway. Once they get into a game, games take forever anywho. It'll take them 30 minutes to build a list from what they have, which is not a large amount of things. A plasma pistol is not worth 5 points. It's not. It might be worth 2. Sure. You know, a heavy bolter is not worth 15. It might be worth 10, 7, 11. I don't know. A power weapon, like a power sword on my sister. The fact that a power sword on a sister would have been 5 points back then, which is the same cost as a power sword on a space marine that is often getting extra attacks and better strength because it's on a different platform, but they're both 5 points is ludicrous. It's stupid. If you're going to put it on a space marine, make it 4 points. If it's going to be on a sister, make it like 2 because it's lower strength and fewer attacks. It's not equivalent. Why was a power fist on a goddamn guardsman 10 points compared to a space marine? You know, it's not equivalent. I don't understand the adverse need, the hatred of non 5 point integers, or whatever the word would be, math stuff. Just 1 point, 3 points, 8 points. I don't care. That's how you can, it's a slider. We just talked about sliders earlier. We just chatted about that. If you have a slider and it only goes in 5 point increments, that's not a slider. That's just beep, beep, beep. You know, if you allow yourself to have all kinds of point values, you know, why wouldn't you? It gives you way more abilities to adjust your points values. It's like, people aren't really taking this for 3 points each, but it still seems kind of good to us, 2 points each. We'll drop it by 1. We'll see if it changes stuff. That's not bad. Why is it like, it's 5 points? Well, it's either 5 points or free war gear for the whole squad. So guess we'll make it just everything free. Like, no. Make it 4 points, 3 points. Like, I don't get why. You may say it's ease of use, but this is not the right hill to die on for new player ease of use. It is not the right hill to die on. Not one bit. You want to do new player ease of use, easy. You do your combat patrol. You got your combat patrol boxes. You have your own powers, your own data sheets, that whole thing. It should not happen this way. And if you gotta keep it, at least don't do it for the GT packs. For the tournament scene, the GT packs, varied war gear, because the people who are going to run GT are people who are going to tournaments or they are playing in a semi-competitive nature. We don't care about that stuff because we own often multiple armies with lots of stuff. The list building part is easy to us because we've done it for so much. If anything, the GT should be, those integers of 5 should be gone. It should have way more flexibility, way more. I mean, points in general is a topic to discuss. And that's one of those nice things where, like, yeah, Eldar are insane right now for a lot of reasons. People will talk a lot about the strand dice and devastating wounds and anti-X and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, everything can be solved with points. At the end of the day, everything can be solved with points. Not well, but it can. Because Voton was solved with points in 9th edition. You know, they changed up a little bit of their judgment tokens and that stuff, but for the most part, the army stayed at like a B+ because they just made them way expensive, just insanely expensive. Everything can technically be solved with points. There is always a way to solve something with points. You can always make things way too expensive to make them good. You know, is it a good way to change it? Not always, no, but it is a possibility. Like, Haruspexes should not be 125. On Tyranids. I don't think Tyranids are a particularly fantastic army. I think they're like mid-tier, but Haruspexes should not be 125. A Carnifex is 125, and they are not even slightly comparable in the tiniest bit. You know, Fire Prisms should not be that cheap. Now, Eldar have a lot of other problems, but Fire Prisms should not be that cheap. Flat out. A lot of this is just I mean, indirect for the most part can be solved with points, you know? And then that's the whole point of the ugly house argument, is that a lot of this can be tweaked. You know, you can always redecorate, you can always rebuild the house, because a lot of the indirect stuff right now can probably be solved with points for the most part. There might be some outliers, like maybe Oaths of Moment should only work if you have visibility to the target, maybe, or you can restrict it somehow, make it so that it's only rerolls to hit if it's indirect and not wound. You know, there's some dials you can change there, but for the most part, you can just point out indirect to be too expensive to take, or make it a premium. That's for the most part worked before. You know, I mean, you gave us the indirect penalty, which is they always get cover and -1 ballistic skill, which helps. Don't get me wrong, it certainly helps. But now all the indirect is pointed too cheap. You got to do both. You got to give it a negative and point it better. And I think you can mostly. I mean, the guard wyvern is like 90 points. It's under 100, which is insanity. In fact, that's the wyvern probably isn't even the problem. It's probably the manticore. The manticore is like, was it 110 or something? I actually don't know 100% how much it is, but it is too cheap. It is simply too cheap. A lot of that can be solved with points, which is nice. Towering, you just bring it back to the 9th edition variation. That should hopefully solve that problem. I'm hoping that probably is all you need for that one. The biggest question, I know a lot of people are harping on, is like the devastating wounds and anti-X thing. Devastating wounds, having mortals on 6s equal to the damage characteristic, is its own weird issue because it's not dedicated to a certain role. Because if you can get your 6 to wound doing mortals, it splashes. And for the most part, the anti-X and devastating wounds combo, which, for example, if it's anti something 4 up, that 4 up counts as a 6. So if it's a 4, 5, or 6, it counts as a 6 for devastating wounds, allowing it to be far more easily procced. I think people are looking at it a little bit wrong, because the idea of that ability is not to have it splash. The idea is for it to have a dedicated role against a particular target and basically ignore invulns. That's basically the point, is for it to ignore invul saves. They got rid of ignore invul saves and instead just made it into mortal wounds, which is, in my opinion, fine on the right guns. You know, like the Knight Valiant's Thunder Coil Harpoon, you know? Anti-monster, anti-vehicle, 4 up, devastating wounds. You roll a 4 up on the vehicle and it just does a shitload of mortals. They don't get a save because it's the Thunder Coil Harpoon. It's a 1-shot weapon on a 500 point model. It's insane. For that, I say like, whatever, you know, whatever, fine. The problem is when you have like the Wraith Knight that does 2d6 damage and you strand dice a 6 to mortal for mortal wounds, but you fire that at like a squad of infantry. And next thing you know, you're doing 2d6 mortal wounds against a squad of infantry because you can so easily proc it. And then you overwatch with it, you can easily proc this. It's a strand dice thing more than anything, if I'm being totally honest. It's a strand dice thing. But that is a huge powerhouse right there. It's a huge problem for the most part, being able to auto proc that stuff. And then also it does kind of suck when someone fires something at like a regular squad they shouldn't, but they just happen to roll a 6 to wound and then boom, tons and tons of mortals. That kind of does suck sometimes. Some people have talked about devastating wounds being mortals in addition. I don't like that because I think that completely removes the entire concept of the gigantic 1-shot gun like the railgun or the harpoon, because it's like, oh, my 12 damage gun gets 1 mortal in addition. Yay. Like it doesn't really do what it's supposed to do. That works, I think, a lot better for more bottom floor stuff like assault cannons and I don't know, possessed like scratchy claws mutations type things. Some people have suggested that the anti-X plus devastating wounds just shouldn't exist. But I don't know. I don't know if I really agree with that. I think it's more that certain interactions are the problem. No one's crying about combi bolters. No one, combi weapons right now, no one gives a shit that it has anti-infantry 4 up and does immortal. I mean, there was like that one Death Watch problem, but like no one cares. That's fine. No one, I don't think the harpoon is really causing a problem. It's very specific interactions, like the old Death Watch one, which mind you, was fixed in like 2 days, which was record by Games Workshop, which was actually quite nice to see. Like, I don't mind that. I guess you could argue maybe you could tone down a bit. Maybe the anti-X should be, it's a lot of like 4s or 3s or 2s. Maybe it should be 5s instead, anti-X on 5. And, you know, just specifically for that kind of mortal wound thing. If anything, I would just maybe say it would be better. One of two things. One, certain things should just get the devastating wounds removed and then given an extra bit. Like, let's say the Wraith Knight's cannon. The Wraith Knight's cannon, I'm fine with getting rid of devastating wounds and just giving it like an extra shot. Or maybe even 2 extra shots. You know? That might be too much. Maybe just an extra shot. I don't know. That's quite the gun. But, you know, it stops it from, the point of the gun is to be a gigantic tank killer. And so the splash effect of it is really not something that it needs to exist with the devastating wounds. So you might as well just give it the extra shot, you know, because for the most part, most vehicles do not have invul saves. The only exceptions are like Krons and very specific important characters, things like Vashtor and like the Lion and Gilliman. You know, like those kinds of characters. And I guess like demons, I suppose. Demons are that. But demons don't have an armor save, so it's kind of that like weird in between. They like die to lethal hits kind of surprisingly easily. So, but also not, because Shalaxi Hellbane is a beast. It's a lot of that stuff. But like I said, that's kind of the reason why the slider I mentioned earlier exists. Like, you just pull out dev, give it an extra shot or something, adjust how it goes. If anything, I guess you could say that there's a possibility for various types, because I think devastating wounds that splash should stay for things like smite, you know, and those kinds of abilities where it becomes D3 mortal wounds and it's like chaining lightning out and that kind of stuff. I'm fine with the possessed mutations keeping dev wounds as they tear through stuff. The possessed bomb issue is more that 1 CP stratagem to just give them 1,000,000. But that's a side problem. It's a good stratagem, though. It's a very good stratagem. But besides that one, it's just those light interactions. I guess you could argue that there's a good way to make an additional universal keyword that's just this does not get a save, which, I mean, that wouldn't be the worst idea, you know? You could, I don't know what you would call it. Instead of devastating wounds, you would call it, I don't know, overwhelming force, you know? That's actually not bad. I kind of like that one. Overwhelming force. You know, on wound rolls of a 6, you do not get a save. Or better yet, make devastating wounds that you don't get a save, and the overwhelming force is the mortal wound one. Because it's overwhelming force, it travels to multiple other units. You know? Overwhelming. Whatever you want to call it. Overcome. Who knows? I think the splashing mortals has a place. I think there is a important use for it in the game as it stands. However, I think certain weapons that do ungodly amounts of damage is the problem. Things like the Wraith Knight's cannon, and that's also a Strand Dice problem too. But certain weapons, like the anti-X plus the devastating wounds, maybe should just be this overwhelming force change or whatever, where you just don't get a save against it. So even though it technically does, it's the same effect for single target units, it's not, or single model units, it doesn't have the same power against all kinds of guardsmen stuff. That's my kind of overall idea for the fix, at least for some of that stuff. But despite my backseat gaming and my backseat, you know, discussions here, I'm actually quite pleased with 10th. You know, it's Beach View with an ugly house. Really, it really is. Because a lot of the stuff does not feel like it was play tested properly. I do not understand how in the goddamn hell Eldar made its way through. I also do not like the lack of input from top level people. I dislike how a lot of the tournament and pro players are not play testers in any way. They say it's to stop leaks. It's not working anyway. You're still not stopping leaks. So it probably wasn't from them for the most part. But truly, it should be over, like, the people who are playtesting the game in the James Workshop. I'm sure you guys playtested a good amount, but you guys don't win tournaments. You know, you don't, and you don't play in like huge ones. At least not that I'm aware of. The Art of War guys consistently walk away with first place finishes every year at all of the major GTs. Why their input is not taken in prior to this stuff is kind of criminal. Or at least heard before this stuff goes through. And then you don't have to play catch up like you did with Voton. When Voton came out insanely overpowered, everyone lost their minds, and then you had to play the nerf game. So I don't know why. It needs more playtesting, and it needs higher level players doing the playtesting. It just does. It just does. And then a lot of these interactions will be caught beforehand, and then it doesn't create a weirdness out of it. Okay. Overall rant done. I really like 10th. And I think for a lot of you, the majority of you who are casual to semi-casual players, I think you'll love it as well. It is simply this massive disconnect with the top level that is a total shit show. 100% total shit show. But there have been given a ton of various ways to adjust dials, change sliders, and make it so that you can absolutely make the game very competitive and fun again, hopefully with a few key changes. I like it a lot. Beach view, just gotta fix that house. All right, that's it for me. I'm gonna have a whole lot of videos on Disco Elysium coming out after this. And just kind of working my way through that. I do not always have a whole lot of 40k content left. Dice Check is back up for the most part. We're going to start getting videos out hopefully pretty soon, and we can have more discussion on that. Okay, goodbye everybody.